So Final Fantasy 16, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, Final Fantasy Dawn Trail are the new additions to the Square Enix portfolio. I will say this year slash last year, and with those releases, it's been become quite clear that Square Enix is basically bleeding money at this point. Um, Now, it has been a slow trend for the last 5 years on the financials for Square Enix, but it has come very apparent and been made public how bad it is actually. We'll be talking about the losses, Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, like backlash, and a little bit of the Dawn Trail backlash, but more importantly, how they can be able to turn this around. And we'll start off, Gio, the losses that they've accumulated over the years, because it's in the billions of amount of money that they've lost. They've lost about, I think, roughly 8.7 billion, or 8.1 billion, with the 5.7 million just lost from Final Fantasy 16 alone. What are your thoughts on those numbers and like the slow trend? Because I said for 5 years they've been losing money, but what are your thoughts on this last 5 years of Square Enix?
I'm kind of surprised, honestly, because you think about Square Enix has been such a successful publishing company for so long. You think by now they kind of, I guess you could say, have a gauge on how things work, and they know they're going to have some losses. Not everything's going to be a success by any means, but to have it so consistently over the last few years that they've had, it's kind of strange. I think it's also talks to what it is that's changing in modern gaming. So I think they're having to adapt and make some changes and understand that some of the things they might have been able to get away with or do before doesn't quite work today. And then to mention, like, I know you already said how much they're losing. They already mentioned again to their investors recently that they expect another $140 million in losses, as it's an attempt to streamline developments, because they're basically going to start cutting down how many development teams they have. And I guess they're going to focus on a smaller crew, more productive crew kind of deal, and keep their budgeting. I guess not spread themselves so thin. Maybe they've been trying to put too many projects together, and that is one of the reasons that they probably suffered so many losses financially in the last few years.
Yeah, and I failed to mention in the beginning, Forspoken is another one of those games that was released and did not receive any warm welcome or attraction at all. And it's one of those games. It's like, it looks beautiful and the gameplay looks interesting, but once you actually start playing it, it doesn't feel great, and then the story is a little lackluster. And Square Enix is well known for their stories, so it is pretty shocking to see a new IP from Square Enix fail so hard. And this is like trailing into like our second point, which is Final Fantasy VII's Rebirth's backlash was around the story. Now, I for one, it's not that I don't like Final Fantasy VII. I love the original story, and I love the direction of the new Final Fantasy VII. Now, whether or not that direction is easy to execute is a totally different thing, because it is a very hard thing to pull off when you're doing a sequel to a very old game. But I, what are your thoughts on that, Gio? Like, because I know you played Final Fantasy VII, the original remake, but you haven't had the time to Rebirth. So, what are your thoughts on the direction of Final Fantasy VII?
Well, like I told you off camera, I'm kind of confused on that whole multiverse kind of direction they've taken, or parallel universe, from my understanding. I haven't got to dig into it. So I'm a little, I don't want to say intrigued by it, but I am, but not in a good way, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, what is turning everybody off about this? Because is it
And
just that so many people are trying to do multiverse stuff? Like, is that was kind of like starting to get people like, all right, we're kind of getting tired of this. Like,
I
why
don't,
are you
I
doing
don't.
this?
What other games are doing multiverse, like besides Avengers?
Well, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just saying, like, you see it in the comic stuff and things like that, which I think that's always been around in comics if you think about it for decades. But I think people just don't want to. I guess they don't want that. I don't know because I haven't tried it. I don't think I would be opposed to it if it makes sense and it ties everything together at the end. I think people are prisoners of the moment, man. So right now, this is what they got in their hand. It wasn't what they were expecting or envisioning for the rebirth. So now they're expressing themselves. I think Square Enix has taken a couple hits like this recently too, where people are kind of disappointed in their story direction in the numerous games, and it seems to be Final Fantasy titles, which is even more surprising. That's probably just kind of tallying up. And I think personally, what I think they're doing right now with cutting down development teams, I think they're trying to get their development teams smaller, maybe combining development teams, but also getting their best talent together to get back on track. If that makes sense.
I think, yeah, they're not only that, they're also trying to recoup losses,
Hmm.
because from the amount of money that the report, or at least what's been said,
Hmm.
uh, that is definitely not an amount that you just make up from like one video game. So you need to cut your losses, and try to put out like hope for like the next 3 years is, or at least next year is at least can put you back, because losing that much amount of money is enough to make certain like if it wasn't Square Enix, any other game would go bankrupt, like, or
Oh yeah.
any other company would have gone bankrupt. So and I do think it's like what they have right now besides Final Fantasy 16, uh Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth has the problem of being the middle child in a trilogy.
Hmm.
Uh, the second part of games are usually not the best, because the first one sets up a whole bunch of like points, and like the exposition and like that novelty makes it really
Hmm.
good, and then the ending has the ability, or the final of a trilogy has that ability to close loose ends and give the viewer or consumer the feeling of satisfaction and closure.
Hmm.
That middle one is not doing well. The middle one is like, it's very hard to bridge between the two, because like, one, you have no novelty. This is the second part, so like everything's been shown. You can't close off anything because like literally the ending is supposed to do that, so you don't want to be premature in anything. And the only thing you could do is add a twist, and the twist has to come through like hard, and that is going to be what makes or breaks the second iteration, because the twist is going to be like literally, oh, Frodo almost dies, or uh we have to stop and like protect a city, and we have to go out our way, and the group is split, or uh oh, the bad guy is actually not the bad guy. It was actually the person that's been following you this entire time, the person who said they were good. Those are the kind of twists that come out in the second iteration, and if the twist is not good, it
Hmm.
really paints that really badly. Uh and that's why I think Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is like very much criticized and things like that. Like, the gameplay is good, the visuals amazing. It really lives up to the visuals that Square Enix has been putting out. But like that plot twist of what you said is a multiverse, it's not 100% a multiverse. It's like, oh, there's like like a whole bunch of timelines that are going to interwove and everything like that. But like, the reason why there's so many timelines is because the Earth, or Gaia,
Hmm.
is kind of interfering. Live stream is kind of interfering against Sephiroth, who's interjected into the live stream. So now he's split off everything. It's like a whole bunch of confusion, and that like multiverses and parallel timelines and things like that don't make sense until the end. They usually never do. And like, maybe after the third game comes out, that the second game might look fondly, but we won't know until the third game comes out. But 16 really hits home on like, they can't make them as they used to. And it's not like, oh, they can't make the game as exciting as they used to. It's no, like, it hits all the old school Square Enix things. Very slow beginning, a lot of setup that's needed, slow gameplay in the beginning, and then because you got to give all these exposition out, and then the game finally wraps up. A lot of people hated that slow beginning. They feel like it's not longer like 16 in that ass or like a Final Fantasy game because it's like virtually like the plot is not very well delivered or like there's too many questions and that like the current gaming community suffers from a problem of if it isn't interesting in the first hour, it's not going to be like played any longer. There's way too many games out there now that everybody's just switching between or have on their blacklist that need to be played. And unless the game is captures you within that first hour of playing, you're just going to go hop off into a different game. Back when like the original Final Fantasy, I think the very last Final Fantasy that did not suffer from this problem was, I would say, the first 13.
Yep.
Because that 13 was like, oh, I'll play Final Fantasy 13. That's going to take up a whole bunch of my time. But like very beginning, you have like an entire like exposition to talk about the world. And that was the only time it was like, oh, that's great. Because Final Fantasy 15, if I don't remember if you remember the beginning of Final Fantasy 15.
I got bored of it.
Exactly. Exactly.
I got bored of it.
There are a lot of people that got bored of Final Fantasy 15. It's a great game, but the very beginning of the game is you pushing a car. That is the cutscene. Mm-hmm. You are pushing a car. And you're like, "What? How did I get here?" And anything like that. So there was many like slowness in like all the beginning of Final Fantasies, and I do think the current gaming community is not suited for that kind of slow ramp up nowadays.
We're in the TikTok age. That's why.
Yeah, the TikToks, the shorts, all of that things, like your information needs to be delved in the first 30 seconds to a minute of any content. So if you do that in a video game, you got 1 hour. You got 1 hour to be interesting. If you don't, then you're dropped. And that's going to be hard for like games that need a lot of setup, especially JRPGs. Now there are certain games that get away with it, but the reason you know why they get away with it? It's because their marketing is very interesting. Like the Expedition 33 is a very interesting idea, but it hasn't came out yet. But the problem I'm gonna have is like it's a JRPG. It has that turn-based estimate. It needs to be interesting in the very first hour, but marketing it shows that it is a very interesting game, and I think people will want to see how it ends if they're at least are interesting in that very first hour. So that is a problem with the genre. And like this idea and how they're losing money, but like the question is how do you turn this around? Because I already said this off camera, but I'll say it again for the gamers. JRPGs are just not as they used to be. Like the original Final Fantasy VII came out and revolutionized the gaming industry with how it was set up and how the story was. Like hell, we even had like very nostalgic and very controversial at the time cross-dressing scene, which is present in the remake as well, but like it doesn't hit as hard as it used to because of just how the environment is right now. So like you can't go back to those old ways, and you can't make JRPGs like in the back. And I know a lot of people are like, yeah, you can. I was like, no, you can't. You really can't. The JRPG is modernized so much that like if you look at like games that consider themselves JRPGs now, I would consider like Persona 5 or the Persona series in general. Persona series, like any new like the Octopaths, I consider like JRPGs. They're really different. They are really different. Like it's not the same games. Those are not the same games. You can't just bring out old versions of games and expect new players to get into it. Like maybe you can get by with nostalgia, but that's not going to work anymore. What are your thoughts on like how do they turn this around, especially with Square Enix like restructuring their company? What do you think they do?
I think one thing you just mentioned earlier that I didn't even think about it until you said it was the marketing aspect. Like the way they did Claire Obscure, I think it has you invested before you even start the game. And I think that's what Square Enix got to get back to doing, because that was one of the things they did do very well. Like if you remember the commercials back in the day for like Final Fantasy VII before it came out, like you were intrigued about what was going on and you wanted to try it out. I wasn't even an RPG player at that time until I started seeing those commercials and previews, and I was like, "Oh, I want to try that game out." So I think they got to invest more in their marketing. I think they need to cut down the amount of projects they're trying to put out. Start getting away from quantity and go back to quality, because that's what we expect from Square Enix. That's unfortunately they put themselves in that like echelon that whenever you see Square Enix attached to it, you expect it to be good. Good or great. There is no in between. There's no okay or that sucked. No, no, no. We expect good or great. Anything less than that everything sucks. There's no okay with Square Enix. It's just as a Square Enix fan, you go that sucked because you were expecting something. And I think, like you said, one of the things they got to get back to focusing on is their storylines, because that's what made Square Enix so popular was their storylines. I was really into Final Fantasy VIII story. Final Fantasy IX, I know, was a big one too. 10 is my personal favorite overall. So,
I know a lot of
13,
people are gonna say something about that, but
yeah,
I'll
yeah, that's
let you
fine.
have to.
That's fine. I don't. Hey, as long as you're a Final Fantasy fan, it's all you can choose your favorites. That's fine. But I think they just got to get back to focusing on quality versus quantity and cut down. I know it sucks to say cut down because I know people are losing jobs and that sucks. Uh, but in order for the business to survive, you kind of understand it, and for Square Enix to continue making games, it's going to be the route they have to go. And they've already started this from 2022, from my understanding, because they already sold Crystal Dynamics, which is the Tomb Raiders development team, and someone else I forgot. So they're already. I guess they've seen kind of the writing on the wall, and they know this is going to take years to bounce back. Like you said, you're not going to recoup that kind of money in one or two games. It's going to take a couple years to get back to where they need to be. So streamlining certain projects, making sure they get the right projects out there, focusing on, I hate to say it, but maybe the best talents they had in each of those development teams, and putting those talents together on projects. It's probably going to be their best bet in reality. And if I have faith in any company to do it, Square Enix, because they've been around for so damn.
The question is how uh, they make use of that talent though, because like the
Mm-hmm.
turnaround in my thoughts is like they need to, and I agree, like quality over quantity, but they don't have the breathing room anymore to start up new IPs. But the problem is that what do you go fall back on, because they need to finish the trilogy. So Final Fantasy
Mm-hmm.
VII is the guaranteed thing that comes out now, and they have their Final Fantasy 14 right now going on. But the problem is with Final Fantasy 14, it's right now in a new era. So you can't really depend on that right now because there's still more setup you need to do, especially with the backlash of Doncho has. You really can't depend on the future of that. So like those are the two things that are kind of already in a bad spot, but you need to finish or continue. And then where do you go from there? Like what IPs? Because you're right. They sold the studios that make Tomb Raider, so they can't work on Tomb Raider. They can make another Final Fantasy, but that's going to take years. They can't exactly create a new IP because like that has too much risk involved. So what do they fall back to? Because like majority of Square Enix games is all about that single player aspect, except for like their MMOs. So like, what do they put out? Because at this point in time, they're going to be in like think tanks. At this point, you need to put out something that has a guaranteed success. It needs to be good, but also you can't rush it.
Well, I was going to say, because now that you brought it up, and I remember too, I was going to ask you about it. Do you think they're going to delay Kingdom Hearts a little bit to make sure that that becomes a success? Because they need Kingdom Hearts to be successful.
Is
It
it
can't fail.
delay? I
I
don't.
don't know.
I don't
I
think
don't
they delay
know.
it because they haven't. Well, they also. I don't think they've ever mentioned a release date for Kingdom Hearts.
Not yet.
But honestly, I think it'd be the opposite. I think they rush it.
But what about if they're questioning some of the decisions they've already made in that game and hasn't been received well in some of the others?
But you're losing money. You could go bankrupt before the game comes out.
Well, I don't think they're that close, but
8.1 billion is nothing to laugh at.
No, I know, but I'm saying their stocks have been bouncing up and down. Granted, they've been on a steady decline for 5 years, but they're not. They're not in a Ubisoft situation. Okay, they're in their own predicament. But
people trust Square Enix. Nobody trusts Ubisoft.
Well, that's what I mean. They haven't lost the trust of their fan base. Their fan base is just like, hey, can you get your shit together, please? Because this isn't what we're accustomed to getting from you guys. Like, you need to figure it out ASAP. And like you said, I don't know if they can go back to another title, but what about with Dragon Quest? What about a new Dragon Quest? What about something that
Dragon Quest 3 has been already like criticized already, and that's their latest one.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is an IP that they can maybe buy some time. They got the Life is Strange coming out. That's another one that's kind of
Life is Strange is what they would probably help them. But like again, that is coming out. So it's like it's already
this year.
Yeah. So like the question is their next projects. Because like Dragon Quest 3 just came out. Life is Strange just came out or is coming out. Like their next project is questionable. Is it Dragon Quest? Am I thinking of Dragon Quest? It might be Dragon Dogma that I'm thinking of.
I think you might be thinking of that one. Which, honestly, I've kind of got some... I would be very interested. They do have a Dragon Quest 12 coming out. But it doesn't say a release date. Their Dragon Quest HD remakes, Dragon 1 and 2, or 1 and 2... They also have Dying Light 2 coming out.
Dying Light 1 wasn't like the great success that it should have been.
But it was enough for them to do a part 2.
I mean, I do think they are going to have to. I don't think they delay anything. I don't know if the delay on Kingdom Hearts is great. I do think the Kingdom Hearts team has more pressure on them though. Because that is the next like big title, their biggest IP, one of their biggest IPs. Problem is that one also has a lot of like tie-ins. That one is too big to fail because you also have Disney that's involved there. So
the expectations are high right now, and Disney can't afford another gaming title to bomb the way.
I don't know if Disney acts as a Kingdom Hearts, or maybe just make the last Kingdom Hearts.
I don't know, but Square Enix has to pay for that licensing, right? So
yeah,
they can't let that game fail because that shit is expensive.
Yeah.
I don't want to say delay, but I'm more like, do you think they try to change anything in Kingdom Hearts? They haven't given a release date, so I can't really say they'll delay it because they haven't given a release date.
The problem is what would you change? We don't know anything.
Yeah, we don't. I don't know.
Like I can't figure out what they changed. Like there's nothing wrong with like, and this is gonna be the last thing I say before we go off. There's nothing. The reason why Final Fantasy 16 failed is because it's trying to do a old process that's no longer valid, which is a slow build-up. You can't do that. Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth failed, and I say failed loosely for these, but they failed because the story in it right now is not adequate enough or on par where it needs to be for a second iteration to be interesting. It already has the disadvantage of being second. It failed to deliver on those expectations. Forspoken, another example, failed because the gameplay wasn't interesting enough. Like it looks very beautiful and mechanically it's like innovation, but it's also just not fun to play. The gameplay is just lackluster and the story makes no sense. And Dawn Trail's another example. Just like the story has a lot of loophole or plot holes, and some character arcs are never fulfilled and things like that. None of these are failing for what I see on the internet from majority of people posting about the wokeness and things like that.
Yeah.
Now there is an argument to be made that wokeness affects story. And I'm not going to say wokeness. I'm going to say just like particular parties that are influencing these stories. But none of these are failing because wokeness is impacting it. And if you feel that way, that is maybe very important to you. But I do think you're putting your priorities a little too high on that, because gameplay comes first. And I'll tell these to the industry as well. Don't focus on like quote unquote wokeness, whatever. Your DEI.
DEI.
Yeah. Don't focus on that. Focus on your gameplay first. This also should apply to gamers as well. Do not say the problem is wokeness when obviously there's many glitches, the game couldn't come out, or like the gameplay is lackluster. Wokeness is not the problem there. If you have a problem with wokeness, that's fine. But an issue or reason you should be looking at is the gameplay first. They need to fix that for Square Enix. They need to buckle down, figure out what their focus group in the modern age for gameplay is wise right now. Because the next Final Fantasy that comes out is going to suffer because, again, JRPGs are just not the grand genre that they used to be.
Nah, and it's like you said, though, it's not that they didn't profit. They just didn't meet the numbers
they didn't make,
were expecting.
Yeah, they expected.
But it was, I'm gonna be honest, it was by a huge margin. I don't know if Square Enix maybe put that expectation way too high, but
that's what
being
we
about
said when we first came out.
Being $120 million short of the profit margin you were looking to make, that's a big gap.
Yeah, that's why, and that's the. I'm gonna leave that for a different topic.
We got it.
All right. Do you have any final things you want to say?
No, man. I just have faith in Square Enix. I think they'll turn it around. I know you're a little nervous because you're like, which title is going to help it? But I think they'll figure it out. I think they got a lot of people. They pay a lot of money. They'll figure the shit out.
All right. All right. Well, that is it from us. Let us know down below your thoughts on the Square Enix as overall, and what's your least favorite Square Enix product? How about that?
And if they can turn it around.
Yeah. To the ground. All right. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time, gamers. Peace.
Later.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Part-Time Gamers podcast. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. And follow us on our other social platforms on TikTok, Instagram, and Discord. Links for those will be provided in the description. Thank you again. We will see you on the next episode of the podcast. And make sure you make some time for video games. Peace.